Hey guys, and welcome back to the next part of our Gunpla Building series. We're still working on the HGUC Yagadoga, and basically I've got the parts that still needed some cleanup all cleaned up, except for one pesky part that is going to need some more cleanup again, but basically those are done, and that means we're ready to just go ahead and start priming the kit. And priming is important because before painting you want to make sure that the paint is going to stick to the plastic very well, and that's where primer comes into play. And basically we're going to be using this one, which is Tamiya Fine Surface Primer, and it's in light gray. You can get primer in a lot of different shapes and colors and forms, and all basically if you're using an airbrush, there's a lot of different types of primer for spraying out of an airbrush. And even in the spray can form, there's a lot of different kinds. This is just what I use because I've always had very good experiences with it. I mean, it's never been bad for me, and it's I think it's not quite the cheapest, but it's not the most expensive either anyway. It's pretty good, and you can get it in this larger bottle. A lot of spray cans come in this small bottle for the paint, but the primer, as you can see, is in this little bit larger bottle. The color of the primer you should use basically depending on the kind of color scheme that you're going to be painting. For this kit we're going to basically be using mostly kind of lighter colors, I think. If you wanted to do something where like you're going to be spraying some like a lot of really dark colors, then you might want like a dark, like a black primer. Whereas if you're going to be spraying the parts white, then you might not want to use a black primer. You might want to use like a light gray or a white primer, I guess, depending on what you want to do. Ultimately, I've just found that the gray usually works for me for what I've needed it for so far. So this is basically what I pretty much always use. And so yeah, why don't we take a look at the parts and get to priming. Okay, so in order to spray these parts, basically what we're going to have to do is, let's just take out this part for one, just for an example. Here's the main shield piece. Basically, we're going to have to attach it to some alligator clips. Now, I've got some pretty fancy ones that are actually on these metal rods, but a lot of people use like the ones that are just on like bamboo skewers, and those are much cheaper and good if you're just really using a lot of them. These can be pretty expensive. I just bought a few sets of them just because, I don't know, I was dumb maybe. But I actually just recently ordered some more of just like the cheap bamboo skewer kind, because I think those are probably better for airbrushing as well, and the sticks are a little bit longer. These are not very long. Let me grab my ruler. See, these are only about 6 inches, like from tip to tip, or in centimeters, it's about 15 centimeters. So only about 15 centimeters long. It's not bad, but you're definitely going to be getting some paint on your hands, so I definitely recommend wearing some gloves. I often don't, but just because I don't really mind just washing it off. The paint does wash off with some soap and scrubbing, but yeah, paint and primer as well. Basically, a lot of this stuff that I'm telling you guys now for priming is going to also apply to painting, so just keep that in mind so I don't really have to repeat a lot of this stuff when it comes time to painting. So anyway, gloves if you want. It'll definitely help keep a lot of the paint off your hand if you're holding the stick. Obviously it's not very far. If you're working with the airbrush you have a lot better control, but with the spray can you don't have as much control, and especially depending on your situation. I have to spray outside because I also don't have a spray booth yet. So spraying outside can be windy. You get paint on your hands and whatever else. So another thing, you should also wear a mask for any kind of spraying. It can just be just a simple surgical mask like this, or it can be a more expensive mask like this one. This is one that I just recently got, so I haven't actually opened it up to start using it yet, but to use that type of mask, it's also probably a good idea. Anyway, and then you need somewhere to stick these, so a lot of people use just a piece of styrofoam, but like the expensive sticks, I also have an expensive holder thing like this. I think these were like $8 each or something like that, so I have 2 of them. Not really the cheapest things, but they're heavy, which is good, and yeah, I don't know, but I'm gonna have to start using styrofoam here pretty soon, or something like that. So anyway, it's pretty simple. You basically just need to clip this onto somewhere on the part. Now this part doesn't really have a whole lot of area where we can clip, but one thing you need to keep in mind pretty much all the time when you're clipping this stuff is where paint is going to need to go and where you don't need to worry about the paint. So like this front section is going to all be covered by this piece is going to cover all of that, but on the back it's not quite the case, where only part of this back section is going to be covered. So basically we just need to keep that in mind for the spraying, and so that means we can probably clip it to somewhere like there, and that'll be good. Then I'm able to spray all of the back. We don't need to worry about exactly the middle, but at least all around the sides, and then on the front all around the sides here. So that's pretty good. At other times you're gonna want to use some tape. Let's see, let's just take these skirt parts for example. These thrusters, you could spray these while the thrusters are still in there, but we're gonna have to paint the thrusters separately, so we're gonna have to be taking them out anyway, so we'll just go ahead and take those out because we're gonna be spraying the thrusters separately. So here, once again, I'm just clipping that onto this part of the thruster where it plugs in, where we don't need any paint or primer. So we'll just clip that there, stick it in there, clip it here. And whether you're sticking your skewers into something like this, or if you're using styrofoam or whatever else, make sure your parts aren't too close together, that like if you bump them or something just after you sprayed them and the parts rubbed together or hit against each other, then they're just going to be scratching the paint or whatever before it's dried. So just make sure you leave plenty of space between the parts. Now here's what I was talking about. I'll just quickly show you here. On this peg, that's going to be pegging into a polycap, so we want a little bit of paint on there is not really going to be a huge problem, but after primer and then paint, it's going to make this peg a little bit thicker, so it's best to just cover that up. And that's where this masking tape especially comes into play. We can just take a piece of this masking tape. It doesn't take much to just cover up that peg, and just something like this. Then that way you'll keep paint off there, and then later it's going to have no problem just plugging into the polycap like that. This part, we could take this apart and paint this separately, these two pieces, because this is the side skirt that holds the beam saber handle, but I don't think I'm ever gonna put it in there again, so I'm just gonna keep this covered, I think, although we are going to be able to see down inside there, but yeah, I think I'm just gonna keep it covered and we'll just spray it like that. The negative thing is that it's going to be hard to spray paint into that area to make sure, but one thing is probably no one's going to ever really see down inside of there, and the other thing is that it'll be easy enough to just take with a brush and just brush a little bit inside of there. So that's probably going to be good enough. We can go ahead and clip this one as well. Another thing you need to be mindful of when you're clipping the parts on here is that if you want to try not to overspray, but if you spray too much, then the paint or the primer or whatever might actually drip a little bit. So you want to keep that in mind, and I usually try to keep it so that like any flat surface or like any large flat surface is facing up, because if I had it like this, then that's going to be a lot of paint on this large flat surface that'll kind of drip down, whereas like here on the sides, this area is not quite as large, so there's not going to be as much paint there. So there's not going to be as much paint that's going to try to run down the side. So basically keep any large surface pointed up. As you can see, that wasn't the case with what we did on this, but this should be fine. I'm just going to have to be careful not to spray too much around the edge of that shield. Now once again, on parts like this on the binder, we could just spray this all in one go. We're definitely going to have to separate this front piece and back piece before we paint it, because this is obviously going to be probably in a gray color, and then this is going to be whatever our armor color is. So if we need to separate it for priming it as well, it's kind of up to you. I usually kind of like to separate everything anyway, but because these are the surfaces that are going to be visible with paint on them, this is really kind of what you need to worry about priming. But we are going to have to separate them to paint, so we might as well just go ahead and separate them now and prime them separately as well. This part might be a little bit tricky to get apart, I think, here. I want to be careful not to break the pegs inside, but it seems like it's going okay. Once again, if we need, we can just bring in our stir stick tool. I can take a peek underneath where the peg is, because I forget. Just kind of wedge that underneath and help me separate that part, and flew across the desk, but I didn't break any pegs, so that's good. And again here about these female pegs, I don't want to get too much paint or primer inside of those, but for the most part I'm going to be spraying mostly on this side and not as much on this side, so it should be okay. We don't really, if you really wanted, you could take a little piece of tape and cover each of those holes, but I think it's probably going to be alright, so we can just do like that. And then for this one as well, we're going to be mostly spraying on this side, so these connections will probably be just fine, like that. So yeah, and so forth. So I think you guys get the idea. Why don't we step outside and do some spraying? And real quick, another couple of quick points to keep in mind is that on parts like this, where it's like an elbow joint, if you spray the primer on it like this at this angle, then when the elbow is bent, it's going to expose kind of the back side of that joint part that wasn't able to be sprayed. So just make sure that on like the joints, you spray it once, and then after it dries, bend it so that you can cover the other area, and then spray it again. This is of course covered a little bit by that energy cable, but here you can maybe see what I mean a little bit better. Like if you sprayed it like that, then a part of that joint wouldn't get covered. Another thing is on female polycap holes like this, that's definitely an area that you just want to make sure you don't get a whole lot of paint into. So what you can do is just take a little bit of tape, then take your tweezers. I have big fingers, so anyway, tweezers tend to work a little bit better for me. Stick that tape on there, and then just kind of work the tape into that hole a little bit, so basically that'll catch the paint that tries going in there, and then after you're done spraying, then you can just pull that out, and you won't actually have any paint inside of there. So yeah, let's spray. And just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like when I open my door outside my apartment, here's a small little mountain here. I'm up on the 13th floor, so as you can see, we're up pretty high, plenty of wind. Alright, so I've got a couple of parts here that we're going to spray. First thing is that you want to hold the spray can probably something about 20 centimeters away, and it's a little bit windy today, so I'm going to have to be a little bit careful. Once again, just when you're spraying outside, one of the things you have to deal with is the weather, and the wind is obviously going to be a big problem, and the other things you have to worry about are extreme cold or extreme heat, and also extreme humidity, especially if it's humid like it is in a lot of places in the world. that can be quite a problem, and it can cause your paint to have lots of negative results. Your paint and primers and top coat and everything else as well. Just the humidity is really bad, and also cold as well. I haven't really heard as much about heat being that big of a problem, but I think it's just the humidity is the big thing that you need to worry about. So let's go ahead and just spray a couple of these parts. Like I said, you want to keep it about 20 centimeters away. I guess that'd be something around 10 inches. I've read online, I think different people say different things, and basically just try it out. You just want to spray in quick bursts. You don't want to be holding it down for too long. Something like this, like that, is too long. You just want to spray it just quickly, just a couple little dashes. So move these off to the side, and let's see, just do something like this. And you want to move the part around as you're doing it. You can always go back over some parts. And make sure you get all the angles, basically anything that you think is going to show. And just when you've got a nice even coat, that's enough. You don't want to overspray, because then you're going to get some dripping, and then that's not good. Then you'll have to sand it and then respray it again. If it's not enough, then that's okay, because then you can always spray a little bit more later. But for now, we'll just give it just a light coat, just enough to cover all the parts well enough, and then that'll be good enough for us to put some paint on it next. Another thing is to just make sure you shake the bottle really well before starting, of course. I think I've heard you want to shake it for like about a minute or a minute and a half. And then just as I'm spraying, usually between each part, I'll go ahead and just shake it a few more times again, just to make sure it's shaken really well every time. So that's pretty much it. As you guys could see, I was actually spraying it a little bit closer than what I said. I was spraying it only at like maybe 10 to 15 centimeters away, but that's because it's a little bit windy today. So normally you would want to keep it a little bit farther away, but just because I had the wind blowing quite a bit. Actually today it's not really that ideal. It's also a little bit dark. It's kind of starting to get dark now. You really want to be sure that you're able to do it in enough light. So like if you have to do it outside, it's best to do it in the middle of the day, not as the sun is going down. So just that way you can see everything really clearly. I just have to look really, really closely at these parts now just because the light is not really that good. Also, just make sure, like on parts like this, which would be the back skirt, just make sure that you remember that the underside of the back skirt is going to show, so just make sure that you get the undersides of kits, of parts where it's going to actually show, so just have to keep that in mind. Whereas on something like here, which is the bottom part of the foot, this inside part here is not going to show, so I don't have to worry about getting that covered really well. I did get a lot of primer inside of there, but it really wasn't all that necessary. It just happened to be by accident. So anyway, I'll get the rest of the parts primed and then we'll take a look at how the kit's looking so far. So when we're all done, that is about it, guys. Everything is primed except for this part, which still needs to be sanded, touched up just on the back of the leg, but here we can see on the other leg, getting rid of that panel line on the back. I'm pretty happy about it. I like that just smooth look about there, and then on the knee as well. Just makes a really nice round kind of organic look for the leg, and came out pretty good. So yeah, everything's looking good, and I think we're pretty much ready to paint. So still a little bit on the fence as for the color scheme, exactly about which colors are going to be where. So I'll think about that a bit and should decide that here pretty soon. So in the next video we can start painting. So until then, I'll see you guys soon, and we'll start painting this kit. See you guys.